Welcome to this episode of the Magic Hour, where we talk about what's happening at Magic Valley, which is a cultivated meat company in Australia. And we also talk about what's happening in the cultivated meat industry around the world. In this episode, we're going to talk about a tasting. It's the second part of an episode, or part two of an episode, if you like, around from lab to table, where we're talking about how we prepared both the cells in the lab and how we prepared different products for what was happening in tastings. And we are very lucky to have a special guest with us. But before I do that, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Andrew Laslett. I'm the head of research and development at Magic Valley, and I'm your host today. Normally we have two hosts, but Paul Bevan, our CEO and founder, is off doing CEO things again. So today it's myself and our special guest, Jacob Goodwin, who is our head of innovation at Magic Valley. And I'll get Jacob to give us a bit of a background and an introduction as to who he is and where he came from and what he does at Magic Valley.
Thanks, Andrew. Jacob Goodwin, the head of innovation at Magic Valley. I've been working here now for a little over a year and a half, I believe. I guess how I got here originally was I have been in the medical-related research fields for quite a while. Started off in protein aggregation in Parkinson's disease, and then the majority of my career has been in anti-cancer research, so mostly drug discovery and development over a range of different cancer types and also different drug targets. I guess how I got onto Magic Valley. So for a long time, I wanted to move away from the sort of fundamental research that I was doing in the medical field to something that had more of a real-world impact and was a little bit more rewarding from day to day. And I wanted that to be in the area of sustainability of some description. And I had thought that I'd have to go back and restudy and do another degree or something in a plant-based science or agricultural science. And then through my work at the CSIRO, I was introduced to Paul, our CEO, and I guess was really lucky that my background was able to match up with what Magic Valley needed in terms of cell biology.
Yeah, no, I guess some of the listeners are thinking, hold on, wait up. We're talking, this is a cultivated meat company. We're producing food for people to eat. What's that got to do with cancer biology? What's cell biology? Do you want to give us a little bit more of a lay explanation of how your many years as a scientist have helped in terms of what we're doing at Magic Valley?
Sure. At the end of the day, cell biology is just about what's happening within the cells. And there are different types of cells. You have cancer cells, you have normal cells, you have stem cells, and they all have specific roles. Not that you want cancers to do much, but all of these cells have basic fundamental mechanisms, and then they have their own specific differences that we study from a day-to-day. Generally, a lot of the technical work that we do on a day-to-day is applicable across all different cell types. So the research that I was doing and the types of research and the methodologies that I was using in my cancer research have gone across and are applicable to stem cell research.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jacob. So you talked about it a little bit, but I know from working with you and talking with you that you went, and what you just said, you weren't specifically interested in cultivated meat, but you were interested in sustainability. But your background and the way you were brought up has played a part in, or actually a really important part of what you do at Magic Valley in terms of how you were raised and where you were raised. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. For context, I guess, I grew up in central Queensland on a cattle farm. So we were primary producers, or my family were primary producers. And along with the farm, we also had a family-run business, which was a butcher shop. So basically my entire upbringing was around meat production. I worked in the butcher shops all the way through high school and during university, during my studies. So quite familiar with the meat side of things and meat processing. So I guess it made a really good fit when the job came available at Magic Valley. So I have quite a lot of background knowledge in how different meats are produced and what's important, what's good and bad about specific types of meat. They sort of just matched up perfectly.
And from my perspective, as someone who's been vegetarian for 8 years, one of the really important of the many important roles that you play at Magic Valley is you're the hardest taste test to get past, because you very much remember what meat tastes like and what meat should taste like. So in our previous episode, where I was talking with Wendy from Magic Valley, who made the pork dumplings, I asked her, she's also an omnivore, asked her what she thought about the pork dumplings taste and how they differed. I mean, I'd be super interested to hear your take on differences, similarities, in terms of taste and texture.
Sure. So obviously, like you said, it's very important to have people that do eat meat, because I guess that's our customer base, right? So we want to try and provide a meat alternative for the population, not just people that are already vegetarian or vegan. We definitely need to have people that know what meat tastes like and are happy to eat the product. And it was actually quite surprising how good it was. So I guess the problem, like why plant-based meats haven't taken off so much, is that they just are lacking a little bit of something that makes it different between meat and the plant-based meat alternatives. And I guess the addition of the cultivated material that we've provided really does push it to that sort of extra real meat flavors and the feelings that you get from eating it. I guess from Wendy's perspective, that's a traditional dish that she would eat a lot. It's my first time eating this particular recipe. So I think it was tasted pretty amazing, actually. Like it was really great.
Yeah, I totally agree with the amazing, delicious taste. I used to live in Hong Kong, and I've eaten a fair few dumplings, and I wasn't a vegetarian when I lived in Hong Kong, and they tasted spot on to me. But maybe that's my memory helping me with the taste, because delicious.
You definitely do hear that a lot, where people that have been vegetarian for a while, they say things taste like meat, or what they remember meat tastes like, and it rarely is what meat tastes like. So it's good to have the perspective that it's something that people that haven't eaten meat will enjoy, but also crosses over with people that do eat meat and would be happy to make the switch if it was available.
Yeah. So going back to your growing up on the farm, are there? I mean, I know you went back and visited family over recent holidays. How do the conversations go? What do people think that are on the land? What do you see, or what would you hope to see as this moves forward? I know we've had discussions around this. I mean, are there issues with the current animal agriculture system that you have? How do you see the two systems fitting together? Do they not fit together?
Sure. There's, I guess, a wide variety of people's opinions about cultivated meat back where I grew up. And I guess that's the same everywhere. And obviously there's a gut reaction to be negative about it if you're in an industry that's your primary income, and which I completely understand. People's reactions, like my parents are, I think, just happy I have a job rather than anything else.
Like everybody's parents, yes.
Yeah. Some of my extended family maybe are still on the fence about it, more traditional in those sorts of ways. So the opinions do vary quite a lot. What I would hope would happen is that we can work together with industries and farms that are established. I'm not sure in what capacity yet, but it's always on my mind about how we can work together. So what we do requires inputs, and there's been some research done in Queensland already about using waste agricultural materials to feed into the cultured or precision fermentation streams. So there's definitely scope for us to work together, to make the products.
Fantastic. What do you think needs to change about the current ways of producing meat? Do you think it needs to change in terms of sustainability, in terms of the existence that people working on the land and how hard they have to work to go through to keep their businesses afloat and things like that? Is that a topic you want to talk about?
Sure. So like every industry, like there's different levels, right? So you have people like my parents and my family. They're very sort of, I guess, smaller scale farmers. So, they've got tens to 100,000 acres kind of thing. But still, that's relatively small. You have low sort of density farming. And then you have a huge gamut where you go to high intensity farming at the end. So I can't really speak much about those practices because it's not something that I'm practically familiar with. But in terms of things that do need to change, Australia is a pretty dry country. And there is problems with, I guess, matching that with a business that relies so heavily on good rainfall. Cows, at least at our end of the farming scale, eat grass. We're not feeding them grain and all those sorts of things. But yeah, growing up in Queensland, drought was that's just what life was. So it's really, really hard. And that sort of snowballs and has a snowball effect on the environment where, the low rainfalls equals less grass and feed. That leads to overgrazing. And if it does rain, then that sort of increases the problem where you have rainfall moving quite rapidly over the topsoil and removing the topsoil. So there's a huge problem with, I guess, keeping the nutrients in the soil so that we can keep going. So in terms of how things could possibly change, I think making sure we can have more sustainable practices in terms of trying to balance out the inputs and I guess not stressing the land so much with high intensity or rotational farming and all those sorts of practices which people have done and do, but it is a big leap for a lot of farmers to make the transition away from the traditions of how they farm, because it is more, this is the way that we've done things, and a lot of farmers don't actually have the capital to take risks on other practices. So instead of trying something new, there's just not the ability to try anything new and take that risk, unfortunately. Trying to focus on changing the practices to more sustainable land management.
Thanks for that, Jacob. I think it's so. As you were going through that, I was reflecting on the differences in our backgrounds. I'm a classic city boy. I've always lived in big cities, and it really underscores the importance of having a diverse team with diverse backgrounds. In our last episode, we talked to Wendy, who Singaporean, has a very different food culture from myself, who has a very different food culture to you. And all of those inputs help us push the best product forward. And I know in listening to you, and I've learned so much about the different views on sustainability. It's very easy in the city to say, oh, this should be done, this should be changed, this should be easy, you should just switch. And that's not always it's definitely not that black and white. So really, really appreciate your perspective on that, Jacob. Thank you. I want to bring the conversation back to the recent tasting event we had and sort of get your views on it, but also explain to the listeners. I know what you did. I know you worked really, really hard to prepare for it, but to explain to the listeners what your role in getting the cultivated meat products out there, both in the lamb prototype last year that wasn't a tasting event, but and also the cultivated pork dumpling that we had at the tasting event a little while ago. Get your description of what your role was, and then what the reaction was like to the products.
Sure. So early on, this is when we did the lamb prototype. It was an extremely small team. So I think it was just the three of us, Paul, yourself, and myself. So I'm very much in the lab all the time. So I guess my role was initially to take the lamb cells, which were a fibroblast, and then go through rounds of reprogramming to turn them into our iPSCs. Going from that stage to expansions, and then trialing different materials and how we can process that downstream to make our mince-based product. Definitely not a chef, but I tried my best.
It tastes pretty good to me.
Yeah, so I think the second round of the tastings definitely were better than the first. Like, we made a huge jump up from the first to the second. Just in our sort of formulation of the mince product, because we did try the pork tasting as well as the second lamb tasting. So, I guess basically from point A to point Z. So from the cells, reprogramming, formulation of the mince-based product, trialing different recipes, and trying to figure out what would be the best way to present this food. So that we have got a number of limitations. So at the moment, we're producing at relatively small scales, which means that we won't have much material. So what can we produce that will look good and will taste good and can be presented? Presentation is a big part of what we need to focus on for these sorts of events.
So, Jacob, what do you think the biggest challenges are? So we've made some products that we think taste pretty good. What are the biggest challenges? What's coming forward for Magic Valley in the next 6 months, 1 year, 5 years?
So there's a lot of challenges at every step of the sort of process. Short term, I guess, is getting the cost down and producing a relatively large amount. So at manufacturing scales, you can rely on economies of scale to bring down your costs, whereas still at our level, like, we're still relatively expensive in how we produce our cells in terms of media and those sorts of things. We've been working with a few B2B companies in the space who are really helping out, which hopefully will bring down the costs considerably, but that's an ongoing process. Obviously, scale up is going to be, it's everyone's issue. So a lot of people, we need to move from adherent cell culture to suspension cell cultures, and we need to move to high density cell cultures. So there's sort of no clear path forward based on, previous work, because no one's had to do this. The pharmaceutical industry is probably the most closely related field, where they use cells to produce things like antibodies and those sort of things for therapies. But even then, in the reactor systems that they use, they're growing cells for the secretion product and not the cells. So they're not actually optimizing the manufacturing process for collecting a cell mass material. So there's definitely this transition to a completely new requirements for our bioreactor systems. With our iPSC technology, I'm fairly confident that it's going well anyway. So we can grow them at quite high density. They have no problems growing in suspension. So a lot of times, cells are adherent, and they'd like to grow in adherent conditions, and they won't grow in suspension. And so lucky, or we've chosen a system that allows us to go straight from adherent to suspension cultures without having to necessarily use things like microcarriers or any sort of genetic manipulation to get them to grow in single cell suspensions and those sorts of things. So many challenges, but we're getting there.
Oh, thanks, Jacob. That's really great to hear. And it's obvious that we have many challenges, but that we're definitely thinking about them, and we definitely have good plans in place to overcome the hurdles. So going back to the tasting event, what sort of feedback did you get in terms of verbal feedback when you were talking to people at the event?
Sure. Everyone seemed really, really happy, and there was quite there was a buzz of excitement basically in the air that I've never really come across in anything else. Like, it's a brand new thing.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of people that were pretty much some of the first people in the world to ever eat something that's like this. It was really, really fantastic. Got a few comments from chefs back on my pasta making ability, which was quite nice. Probably surprising, but quite nice. Everyone had really good things to say, actually.
Yeah, so just to explain to people why Jacob's talking about pasta, we had a private tasting event where people also signed waivers that the media wasn't invited to this one. But for that event, do you want to describe the pasta that you made?
Sure. We decided we want to have another go at the lamb. So we made a second lamb prototype for this private tasting that we had. Again, we had to go through a process of trying to figure out what was the best format to give it to people in. So, obviously lamb's used in a lot of different ways, but we had to do something that was, I guess, relatively small, could be presented in a nice sort of way. So went through a few different options, and we ended up with lamb tortellini. So that's what I had made for that tasting.
And I can attest it was quite delicious. So Jacob, how did it feel? What do you think about? I asked this same question to Wendy in a previous episode. How did it feel cooking cultivated meat for the first time? Did you actually think about the fact that the animal that the meat had come from was still alive and running around in a field?
To tell you the truth, the days that we do these things are quite intense. So there's maybe not much time to focus on that in the minute. I guess looking back on it, there's a bigger, feeling of awe and achievement. So, again, I wanted to move to this role to have a larger impact and just produce something rather than the fundamental research which helps people in 10 or 20 years.
Yep.
Just I guess looking back on that, it felt pretty good.
Cool. Did you get the opportunity, or were you busy in the kitchen to hear Paul's introduction to the night?
I was in the kitchen.
Okay. I think those introductions that Paul gives, where he talks about how historic an event it is for the tasting, and that it's those people, some of the first people in Australia to try cultivated meat. There has been other cultivated meat, but it definitely not cultivated lamb previously, and those it's really quite historic. And when I heard him say that the animal that this meat comes from is still going around in the field, there was literally, it's almost a jaw-dropping moment for the people in the audience. I don't know, I was lucky enough to not be slaving away in the kitchen like yourself and like Wendy. Thank you for all of the hard work that both you and Wendy do in the kitchen and in the laboratory. So innovation is kind of like a buzzword lately. I feel like what we're doing at Magic Valley is we have to innovate nearly every day to come up with processes to make things work, especially taking processes that use animal products, and we don't use any animal products. Do you have a personal process that you use to help you come up with new ideas around techniques or new ways for developing the cultivated meat, different products? Or how do you come up with some of the great ideas that you come up with?
I guess it's just being curious mostly about everything. Like my mum likes to tell a story of when I was a kid, and like pulling apart clocks and things like this to try and figure out how things work. I do remember pulling up a few of her plants to see how they went underneath the ground as well. But yeah, just always trying to like learn new things. Like even outside of work and sort of the hobbies that I have, I try and make it about learning new skills and just getting new knowledge about different things. So I guess couple that with I'm pretty much always connected to the internet in some way, and I'll be on my laptop and on my phone and my iPad all at the same time doing like 5 different things. So just always trying to learn something new, and I guess that's where it pulls from. So yeah, we just constantly chat to different B2B companies. Obviously there's, a little bit of research that's publicly available in the space. I like to go back to older research that's been done. So a lot of the modern research papers are hugely complicated, and there's just so much going on, and there's not much time to explore things really. Whereas a lot of the older research papers, very specific problem answer, and it's easy to find or easier to find an application for that research in our research. So I do go back to these older papers quite a lot, because obviously they were produced from one perspective, and I guess mostly from a medical background, but there's parallels between what we do and what's the medical field. So yes, using that sort of knowledge from a different perspective.
One of the points you brought up in that answer, I'd like you to expand on a little bit, if you can, in terms of your hobbies and some of the hobbies that you have, and some of the things you like to do, and how they've helped us at Magic Valley.
Sure. I guess in terms of hobbies, I haven't really landed on any one thing. I'm sort of a collector of hobbies at the moment. I guess it happens to a lot of people that go through PhDs and that sort of, you get busy and moved overseas and, can't take things with you, and you don't sort of do those sorts of things. So when I came back to Australia, I sort of made an effort to sort of try as much as possible. So, I've got I do things like 3D printing, which has been quite useful. So we've been doing some in-house designing for bench scale, small bioreactor systems and those sorts of things. I've got quite an interest in sort of home scale manufacturing. So again, like the 3D printers, CNC, and those things like that. Some electronics work with Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and those sorts of things, which have been quite useful, if not for some direct application, but just learning languages to speak to people who it's their job. So just being able to speak to people and sort of knowing what to ask rather than just having vague ideas has been quite helpful. But yeah, basically I'll give everything and anything a go.
No, it's been incredibly useful, some of your side projects at home that have helped us in a range of different ways. And I'd just like to make it very clear to anybody listening that Jacob is very happy in his role at Magic Valley and is not looking for a job anywhere else. So back off. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us today and to sharing both your expertise, your scientific expertise, your ideas around innovation, and also your thoughts around the whole industry and how it's potentially fitting and moving towards a different relationship with the traditional farming and traditional livestock industry. Because I think I would be surprised if there's many people around the world that have the same background as you that are working in a cultivated meat company. So I think you really do provide a quite unique and very valuable perspective. So I think that's come across today in the podcast. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So thank you also to our listeners for joining us today on the Magic Hour. If you want to find out more about Magic Valley, you're very welcome to check us out on our website, which is www.magicvalley.com.au. We also have a LinkedIn, a Facebook, a Twitter, an Instagram, a TikTok, and our podcasts are available on Spotify, YouTube, the Apple Podcast, and please feel free to hit the subscribe button. So I think this is now our 6th episode. So if you've missed some of the earlier episodes, they're all available there. So thank you very much for listening. And maybe next time at our next episode, our wandering CEO is off doing CEO business. We'll be back to help us interview our next surprise guest on our next podcast episode. Thank you very much for joining us.